Hello and welcome back to Crew Parley. Crew Parley is the flipped version of the normal thing we do in this channel. Normally I hear your prompt and then respond on the spot. This is my prompt and you all got to submit your responses, so we'll talk about them. My prompt for June was hard to recommend games. Don't hold back, I said. Hit us with something you want to recommend, but which is a tough sell for some reason or another, and then go ahead and try to pitch it. I think a lot of this potential audience will simply want to try your recommendation, and it'll also be interesting to focus on what sorts of qualities make something feel hard to recommend. I have a lot more to say about that, actually, and we have two great examples. iPatch Notes first, and then we've got one from To Parley Grandmaster Food. So yes, these are two recommendations, but I also think that they will be primarily interesting as ways to think about recommendations. I have kind of two minds at the same time, which is sort of why I asked this. I think that most recommendations are very bad, and it's very easy to give a good recommendation, and people don't take recommendations often enough, which those two opinions don't seem compatible. If it's so easy, why do people do it badly so often? And if they're bad so often, then why do you think people should take them more often? This I can elucidate with the help of these responses. You'll at least know why I think that, and then you can decide. But that's all for attempts to change your behavior, that this parlay can do that. And it's very possible that you, dear listener, are already statistically someone who probably is less guilty of these things, even if you agree that they are actually bad and therefore warrant some guilt. iPatch Notes begins with Dungeon 100. Dungeon 100 is an unfinished, overpriced acid flip with weird priorities and game balance. Okay, a strong start. However, it is also the only build-like roguelike I know of that consistently pits the player against themselves. Cool. Already, just to not derail too much, a strong pitch. So why are you recommending this? Because I like it could be a useful reason, but is the worst way to explain. Like, tell us the mechanical reason why you like the thing. I think we'll come back to this, but one of the primary reasons so many recommendations are bad is because they seem to not understand this, or because I hate this so much and have such a bee in my bonnet about it. I actually happen to know from talking with people that many people surprisingly believe that it is not possible to say that. In other words, when I say, okay, but what is the reason you like it? They say like, no, it's just what I like. And it's like, no, but there is a reason why it's what you like. And I have heard people often at that point in the conversation say, no, there is no reason they like it. That's wrong, but okay. And here you are leading with that reason. It's the only build-like roguelike you know of that consistently pits the player against themselves. There's a lot in there. It's a game that has some randomness. The randomness is somewhat controllable. You feel you can make builds in the game consistently, and the player fights their own builds. Sounds pretty cool so far. What was that stuff about it being an unfinished, overpriced asset flip with weird priorities and game balance? Anyway, the thrust of the game, iPatch Notes continues, is ascending the eponymous 100-floor dungeon with a selection of D&D-esque classes. Each 15th floor houses a boss, and a run-winning build becomes that floor's boss. Blurb. So this is the blurb from the publisher and developer. ARPG experience without the grind. No equipment and gear to spend countless hours grinding for. Instead, freely choose from hundreds of cards to combine in interesting ways for diverse character build possibilities. I guess by ARPG they mean action RPG, by which they mean Diablo? Okay. So watching some footage of the game, you're going to see something reminiscent of that type of play. Unlimited character creation. Create unique skills by combining different effects of the hundreds of available cards. Transform into a bear that spits out dozens of flaming arrows a second. Or summon hounds that can summon even more hounds, or play as a spin-to-win warrior. That's not an especially diverse range of examples, but okay. Become the dungeon boss. Every 15 floors of the dungeon, there will be a dragon. Slay the dragon, and you will become the boss of that floor. You must then defeat your past characters to progress further into the dungeon. Blurb end. Back to iPatch Notes text, player narratives are something that I'm interested in when told through the lens of mechanics. Dungeon 100 runs are time limited and resource limited with known endpoints. Because the bosses the player must defeat are their own builds, it is entirely possible to soft lock a particular run because the player won too hard. Floor 30 is a common reset point after the player cuts their teeth on the mechanics and completes more build pieces. Needing to start over at floor 1 is somewhat alleviated by lack of meta progression. There is no grind. You don't have to unlock stuff or progress, like meta buffs between runs. Common mechanics in many roguelikes, apparently not here. Interesting. The game has some quiet build thresholds in the filler mobs between the player-made bosses. System mastery and satisfaction come from intuiting these thresholds while dungeon 100ing. I assume that what you mean is making your character powerful enough to deal with those enemies, but not more powerful than necessary, because then you make a harder boss for yourself. I still recommend the self-inflicted build PvP on sale, about $6 US, despite its warts and flaws. Great, an excellent review, and that is going to be my thesis for this parlay, at least for the beginning. We'll see if it changes. That a good recommendation is basically a review, although most reviews are bad too, according to me. And what makes a good review is that you know what you would be getting into if you played the game. After all, why would you ever not take a recommendation? Someone else liked it, so unless you believe it's impossible for you to like it, it's not, then why wouldn't you want to play it? Furthermore, people often take recommendations of popular things. Now, something being popular doesn't mean it's good or bad, it means it is broad, that a lot of people can enjoy it. So it's doubly true that if something is popular, it seems, on the very surface level, like there should be no reason to reject the recommendation. Well, obviously the thing people are worried about is that they won't like it. So telling them what you liked about it, it's really, we just need to know what it is in more detail, basically. And this is what really frustrates me, is I feel like most marketing copy and most reviews of games are about what one might like about the game. I get why you would think to tell people that, but aren't about what is more useful, which is, what do you do in the game? And is that something the player likes? Now, I think that the place they're coming from is that they think that the player doesn't know what they like, which is kind of true. But I think the player could know what they like so easily that it is silly not to simply ask them to know that. And the benefits are so large that it is silly not to simply ask the player to know that. And I think that that's true in this case as well. We have something where, if you've played any roguelikes before and you go watch some of Dungeon 100's gameplay, iPatch Notes has done a great job here giving us a list of the things that the game is kind of about or doing. You don't grind stuff, there's no meta progression, there's a relative amount of control such that you can kind of make builds. You didn't talk too much about the build system, but that's okay, that's going to be a part of the game that would be more complicated anyway. How do you fight your own builds? And does that mean that you want to make builds that are a little weaker on purpose, such as to make your time easier? I don't totally understand the exact nuances of the experience, but it sounds like yes, somewhat yes, right? You give us enough to go off there. How expensive is it? And would you recommend it ultimately, despite the fact that you think it has some ugly stuff in it, basically? And the answer is yes, it seems like. How have you been playing it? A little bit, just to give us an idea. And if there's flaws you overcame, pretty much true of any game you're gonna play, there are bad things, there are bad parts, so why are you playing it anyway? That's sort of the more useful version of what do you like about it? Why do you consider the parts that are bad, which inevitably exist, to be worth it? And then there are good parts. It's funny because I've seen reviewers, and I like these reviewers, that try to focus on what the game is good at. And I myself have said, I think a philosophy that is helpful is to discuss just what the thing does well, and then how well it does that does involve discussing what are its weaknesses, because they will interfere with it doing that well. If a game has weaknesses, but they completely do not interfere with what the game does well, you could argue those are kind of not weaknesses, because if they completely don't interfere with what the game does well, then they're not part of the game. Unless you want them to be, maybe. Like maybe the game has really bad side quests. Could be a game that could be an example of that, but you can just not do them. But even then, there are games that are kind of about doing some of their side quests. But anyway, you get it. And so, yeah, I think this is really good. This is a really great starting example. And I would say was kind of the final straw for me to get Dungeon 100 myself, at least when it's on sale, which let's check if that's true now, actually. Because it sounds cool. And you have the thing that makes for a good recommendation, a good review, which is what good thing would happen if you played this? And you have done a very good job of clarifying that. I'm going to search Dungeon 100 just for somewhat performatively to see what's going on. And right now, it's not on sale. It's $12. I'm going to say I'm going to wait, given your questionable review. Another thing about Dungeon 100's aesthetic is that it's very like... this is a game that visually or on the outside could look highly derivative. And I think that, as always, this is the case where embracing like what the game is doing, what the game is about, what the game is for, is a really good way to review it, because the outer derivative look belies the inner, not complexity, but like interesting game systems. A lot of games that have the most gameplay going on have the least original outer appearance, and I think that's always useful to know going in. There's a lot of games that are kind of ugly, but have really interesting game design in general. And this is pretty obvious why that is. It's because people who are interested in making interesting mechanics often don't have the artistic skill to realize those mechanics in a way that is beautiful. It's not going to stop them. They just make the game and it is fun, but it looks janky or whatever. And magic happens when those two things are married, without giving into the marketing people who make the game all about its aesthetic. So, yeah, I seems worth a look to me, I guess. This also, if this is an unlock all situation where you have everything unlocked from the very beginning, this kind of sounds like it would be a good game for Steam's refund policy, where you might be able to, you really might meaningfully experience the game in 2 hours, and then you could refund it if you weren't having fun. But I don't do that too much. I think for the most part, especially for me, like I don't have a lot of money, but I have enough money that I can play your game, developer, and give you money for teaching me, even if it was just your mistakes. I try not to refund using that policy. I do it as a matter of like security. You can sometimes just get more or less scammed if you explore games a lot. So it's important to know that you can get a refund. But I try not to do it if I like merely disliked the game, but it was what I thought it was going to be. You know, if they falsely advertise, that's kind of a different story. No judgment on refunding things. I think that's a good thing to do for most people. Just to say that as a member of the industry in some form, I make an extra effort not to do that, because I feel like I kind of am getting what I paid for out of the game. It's not entirely fair to then like find a sneaky way to refund it just in time. But yeah, that is wholly because I am participating in the industry in a more active role. So I wouldn't begrudge anyone that you can refund things. It's okay. Anywho, pretty cool. Yeah. So I think the main takeaway from this early part of the parlay is just the feeling that when you recommend a game or when you recommend something, a lot of our recommendations, according to me, a lot of reviews are bad. And the primary reason that they're bad is that they do not give you an image of what the point of play. Why would you pick this? You know, they don't give you an idea of what playing this will be like. Why would you choose this over something else? You're choosing. It's not a hype pitch to get you blindsided by excitement to get the game. You shouldn't do that, because you can choose based on what you like, the mechanics you would enjoy. And I believe that the primary reason that people don't write copy for their games this way, or that other people don't take recommendations this way, is because they believe that people do not know what experiences they would prefer. But I believe that they are incorrect. I think that if you force people to take recommendations this way, they actually would be able to use them, and they would immediately be much better off and happier, and there are no downsides. It's only because there are seemingly simpler recommendations available that people are attracted to them and then play a game that is a mediocre fit for them, not knowing how good it would be if they just gave up on those seemingly easier to understand recommendations. When the appeal of a game is hard to appreciate, it either isn't there or it's really cool. I think a lot of games that have really interesting gameplay loops that do an interesting thing, you do something that is interesting and complex while you play them. It doesn't have to be complicated. I just mean maybe not something you've seen before. When I say complex, I just mean like a complex idea, I guess, not complicated or convoluted. Usually those games are hard to describe, and therefore people think that that means they would be harder to get into. It might not be that you will have played this exact gameplay loop before, no, but a lot of the times you might have played something appreciably similar, and it's really not that bad. Again, I think that is really just an argument for playing somewhat longer games so that you don't have to reorient yourself with like a whole new thing that often. But as long as the game gives you time to settle in and shows you what it's going to be about, and then you can stay with it for a while, it's like you kind of want something that isn't the exact same thing as something else, because you can play more of most of those games. There's not really a reason you need to stop playing if you already have the thing you really think you'd like. Trying to get more of that thing, but just slightly different, it's like, well, it's going to be slightly different, slightly worse at the things you wanted, I think. So, yeah, I don't know. I think this is a good example of that. And a game that on the outside, I think a lot of people would probably reject the recommendation if it was given as a recommendation or a review other ways. But because iPatch Notes here, you've taken a very like purpose-built review process. If you are a person who would like the things the game can do well, which you now know, unlike most other reviews, which will just say the game is whatever they see it as being on the outside, and then they'll say how they felt about it. Because this is a much more useful recommendation or review, in my opinion, and it tells you what the game is uniquely doing or trying to do. You can decide if you want that experience and then go do it, and have kind of a plan. That's another benefit of these style of recommendations or reviews. I feel that because they have kind of a goal in mind, you go into the game with your own designs for it. This is another reason why I think a lot of people get kind of led astray when they get recommendations. They play the game for the things they would want from it, which that's okay, but they're not selecting for games that are just good at a thing, and then do you want that thing? They're selecting for games that appear to let them do what they want out of context, and then in context that might not be exactly what they want. So for example, like a power fantasy, but what does that mean? Like that could be constructed a lot of different ways. If a game appears to fulfill a power fantasy, I mean, you might think it's not interesting to hear technically how it fulfills that power fantasy, but that's what you need to know. There is a reason that people like what they're referring to as a power fantasy. That, as I've told you at the beginning of the parlay, I've actually had many people literally just tell me they truly believe, according to them, I don't think they do truly believe this, but according to them, they believe it is not knowable. Like it cannot be known by human mere mortal minds why they enjoy the thing they enjoy. But like it really, really can though. And in many cases, it's like, I don't know, I'm pretty sure I know. And they'll go, no. And I'll go, okay, well, here's a game recommendation. And they'll go, I love this. And I'll go, yep, that's because you like this about that game. And they'll go, no, that just is what I enjoy about both games in common. It's a complete coincidence. It's like, okay, here's another recommendation that does that thing, but nothing else. And they'll go, whoa, another great one. How lucky, and definitely not based on logic and reasoning. And I'll go, okay, that's fine, I guess. But why don't you want, you have this golden icon that tells you, hey, if the game has this, I'm often enjoying that right now. Like maybe I should go seek that thing out in games. I don't know. And then of course I always recommend like watching a little footage of the game can be the extra piece, I guess. Anyway, a really good first recommendation, and gave me a lot of time to exposit my feelings about what makes a good recommendation, because I am totally co-opting Crew Parlay for my own nefarious purposes while still enjoying your responses. Are we good with that? That's what I'm doing. Okay, democracy. It's what we do on pirate ships. Privateers. True Parlay Grandmaster Food. I originally wanted to recommend a ton of games, but I've talked about games like The House in Fata Morgana, 1000X Resist, and Underrail in previous Parlay, so I decided to focus on something new. Something that I've tried to recommend many times, and which no one seems to want to try. Okay, hear me out. Kerbal Space Program. Please don't skip forward. I'm You got me, it's fine. Many people call The Outer Wilds a 10 out of 10 perfect experience. I don't disagree, but it didn't impress me back when I played it, and the reason is that I had experienced many of its emotional peaks before in Kerbal Space Program. And in some ways, Kerbal Space Program is even more impressive than Outer Wilds, going a lot further in its effect on the player. Emotional peaks are a hard to define concept we've been discussing in Mr. Fruit's Parley, solo Parley. I guess I would describe them, to summarize here, as like the effect that the game sets up for the player and then sort of pays off as a feeling through the overall effect of its gameplay. Not like how many rewards the player is showered with in in-game items, but things like you feel a sense of achievement you would not have felt if the game hadn't set it up this way. You feel a sense of loss, maybe. It doesn't have to be a good thing that the game has set up a certain way, etc. Something like that. Sure, yes, Outer Wilds is a game that a lot of people describe in a way that I would agree with you, Mr. Fruit. I think they're dancing around that thing because they don't have a thought tool for it, and you do, and you call them emotional peaks. I think that's useful. And you're saying Kerbal Space Program does some of them in a similar way, and here's how it does them. The premise is simple. You are leading a space agency on the fictional planet of Kerbin. While the planets and star system are scaled down by a factor of around 10, its scale is still close enough to real life and beyond that of any other game you might have played. To get around the solar system, you will need to build vehicles, mostly rockets. The build system is very simple to operate. You just snap together pre-made parts like command pods, parachutes, stage separators, fuel tanks, rocket engines, and wings. Stage separators like stages of the rocket thrusters. Cool. It's incredibly easy to get going. What happens next is you crashing against the wall that is actual fucking physics. Technically, the physics is simplified in multiple places, but the foundation is very much real, and those simplifications won't matter to the vast majority of players. You will need to learn actual principles of rocket science to get into orbit. You learn by failing, and the game is relentless in encouraging failure for the purpose of learning. It is a simulation, but one that never takes anything too seriously. And I believe there is some incredibly beautiful emotional peak in this game. Emotional peak is an amount, that's kind of fun, which one would only ever get from the rush that is understanding the laws of natural science in the real world. Sadly, for whatever reason that we won't get into, oh yes we will, that rush is something that isn't approachable for most people. Kerbal Space Program can give you a rush of accomplishment that is incredibly close to that real-life experience, among many other things. Cool. Again, I think another really good recommendation and review for similar reasons to the eye patch notes one. You've given us a target. Like, why? What is it about this game that would kind of solve a problem? You've given us a nice perspective point as well. A lot of people felt similar things from Outer Wilds, but this is doing things in a different way, but is maybe achieving something similar. Cool, helpful. What is the setup of the game? What do you do in the game? Excellent. What is the moment-to-moment thing that you do in the game? The game is a first-person shooter is not what you do in the game. How is it a first-person shooter? Do you hide behind cover? Do you manage ammo? Is it more about precise aiming or more about managing your damage? Is it realistic in that enemies die to 1 or 2 shots to the body or 1 shot to the head? Well, you can survive more shots to the body, but you might wish you hadn't. Or is it more of a game that's using them as stat pieces? Maybe The Division comes to mind as an example, where enemies have a totally insane amount of health, but it's meant to be like it's a stat system that just does use guns as its way to express. You can't survive being cut through with a sword more than once either, but there are lots of games where the enemy has way more health than that. It does look a little weirder when it's guns, but it still does make sense. So that would be like, what do you do in the game? And I think you did a pretty solid job with it here. I particularly liked the part where you said that one of the tricks is that Kerbal Space Program seems like it has a lot of like encouragement or structure, I hope. Structure for failing. You said you learn by failing and the game is relentless in encouraging failure for the purpose of learning. I would assume that means that there are mechanics and missions designed for you to fail. The game guides you somewhat through your failures. I think that can make an absolutely massive difference in the player's experience. The player constantly failing all the time, and it's just their own philosophy or drive that says, hey, you should just keep experimenting even if it fails, is something that I know a lot of people won't maintain. I think it is sort of the end goal of being your own human, that you do maintain that your motivation for doing things is your project, not that someone else says it's a good idea to do it. But it's completely fine if people don't find that satisfying on the surface. However, it sounds like this game is also giving you some structure, and the act of the game saying, hey, you're supposed to be failing and experimenting, go for it, whether implicit or explicit, can be a big deal. A simple example that comes to mind is how Elden Ring has a boss set up right at the beginning that is very decisively meant to kill you easily, and then you die, and then you do the tutorial or not, and then you go outside again. And then there's another boss right in front of you that is meant to kill you easily. The game, hopefully by this point implicitly, is attempting to communicate that you are supposed to run away or fail when you fight bosses, and that it is normal for you to like avoid something and then come back later, and that you have to just get a sense of that and gauge the strength of your opponents. That is good. That's the strength of the open world, as long as it's communicated. I think for many people, I've certainly got a friend like this, they still don't think like but I feel like I'm just running away from everything. It's like, okay, I mean, find a way to claw your way up. Like, I had a lot of fun doing that. It's okay if you don't. I do feel like the game pretty clearly communicates that, but a system that directly rewards it. I'm imagining something in Kerbal Space Program like literal quests that say like fail 5 rocket launches using different parts or something like that, you know? And that can encourage people a lot more. I could see that working well for many more people. I would say the elephant in the room for that kind of thing, of course, is that sometimes I'm also very worried about this kind of experimentation, trial and error in games, because I'm worried that the developer is simply incompetent, not that the game like is about me. It's supposed to be doing trial and error. It could be that the balance is just weird, or the game isn't really guiding the player effectively, or I missed some little thing and now the game is borked. A huge majority of people doing game design at both AAA, big studio, and indie level, everything in between, a huge majority of the people doing game design didn't have a way to study it before they did it. They just do the thing they've come up with. In some ways, this is incredibly impressive. Most people have their own homegrown system for how to do the entire activity of making a video game from scratch. In something like a movie, this is almost ridiculous to suggest. Movies are such a type of medium that watching one is not the worst part of like a 101 film course. You see lots of film techniques and structure. It's a single linear thing. You sit down and watch it. You have a lot of time to focus on those elements. Video games often act upon you or provide consequences, or there are parts of the game that you don't see as you play through them. And all these things make it a little bit harder again and again to actually know how video games are constructed. Thus, we have so many people, even professionals in the industry, who like a thing, but implement it in a game in a way that completely misses the point of the thing they liked about it, and that they just don't know. They might even, in many cases, respond, no, I think that's good. It's like that thing in that other game, and I liked that, so I implemented it in this game. And you go, well, but it's like bad in this game, though, because it doesn't have these underlying systems that work to make it a fun feature. And the developer goes, oh, I was using it this way and it was fine, but yeah, it completely doesn't do the thing that other system in that game does, because nobody knows all builds. They had their one experience of something in the game, they replicated that one experience, but not really the full range of features that other people enjoyed because they didn't know what they were. That's okay. Not everybody needs to be a psychology student in the grand scheme of philosophy. I'm not talking about in university to make video games. But if you want to make video games, I think you do need to be a student of psychology. There is no good game design without psychology, in my humble opinion. This is something you make other people do, not something you show to other people or have them listen to. You have to make other people physically do a thing when you make a game for them. So you need to know what is going on in other people's heads, or take some interest in what's happening. Even if your game's goal is just to flummox people's expectations, you still need to know what they are to some extent. You are not an person who represents all humanity, so it's usually necessary. And it sounds to me like this is a game that knows that to some extent. Cool. Now, Mr. Fruit, I feel like you've given a pretty strong pitch, which is why I'm troubled to see that there is this second part that qualifies the recommendation and provides some frustrations that you've had when people have heard this recommendation in the past. You might say, Mr. Fruit continues, well, you work in the natural sciences. Of course you'd be into the rocket simulator game. My evidence for the universality of Kerbal Space Program's experience is purely anecdotal, but it's there. I've had one, and exactly one friend, try the game, and they so happen to have nothing to do with science or engineering. All I can say about their experience is they still rant to me about that moment when they first managed to land on the moon. M-U-N? Mun? Yes, it's called the Mun, or Moon. Something like 11 years ago. For them, it's one of their favorite gaming moments of all time. I believe that it's one of the very few games where you accomplish something real, more or less. Won't get into that here for time reasons. Please try this game. It can be magical. I'm going to skip past one other thing. There's tips for starting the game. We'll get to that at the end. You also said, people usually just look weirdly at me whenever I bring up this game. It's a mixture of I'm too dumb to play this, or just because you like something doesn't mean I will, and you are a stupid for thinking this is a good suggestion. Well, I'm very passionate about Kerbal Space Program, I can tell, and I believe that it is a good suggestion, and this might be the only opportunity where that would ever be taken seriously. I mean, on the contrary, Mr. Food, I'm sorry you had that experience. Like, it doesn't really make valid sense to be skeptical of this recommendation after you've explained it like this. It might be a case where you just didn't get to explain fully when you recommended it previous times. That's understandable. But I mean, like, I might not like it, but like, it's not a weird recommendation. And to be blunt, I think it's anti-intellectual of people to act like somehow they can't enjoy it, like just because they think you're so hopelessly biased by the natural sciences that you are the one who can enjoy it, as if other people don't enjoy like the joys of human experimentation and discovery. When you put it that way, it's kind of insane that anyone would suggest that a game that is good for this reason, as you set it up to be, that the player kind of achieves something on their own, would be something that somehow other people would not be able to enjoy. Like, you might not end up enjoying it in practice. That's true. But the fundamental thing that you're enjoying, I mean, again, in the first place, I sort of feel like a crazy person sometimes. There is nothing that means that people cannot enjoy something someone else enjoyed. I mean, you might not enjoy it in practice, and there could be any number of reasons for that. But as long as the thing that they're enjoying is something that comes from the game, it's not them adding it in. They can describe what in the game causes you to have this experience, what inside of the game's systems, not just what they did in the game, but what is built into the game that causes you to have that experience, okay? And then they are also not extremely new to the type of media. So for example, like Mr. Food has played tons of other games, has the years of Parley, not all about games to be fair, but for one thing to show for it, then it's almost impossible that you won't be able to enjoy that. Like, I don't really know why people think that they can't. Like, we've had a few discussions on the Tea Time streams where I've been talking about this mindset that I think the implications of are complicated, but the idea is simple. There really isn't any reason you can't acquire the perspectives other people have, which cause them to be able to enjoy the thing they enjoy. You're not going to duplicate them fully. It's not cloning, but you will be able to see things from that way and maybe enjoy the thing. The question is whether you ought to spend the energy to put yourself in that position, not whether it is possible to put yourself in that position. It is. I think for many people, it's just that they will never in their life get the chance to do this, and I highly encourage that you do. I think it's a much more fun way to live your life. For me, a rather recent innovation, that there really isn't anything getting in the way of you enjoying the thing. It is possible that a lot of people behave as if they enjoy a thing, and they are literally all just wrong, and the thing is inherently bad, and isn't something that most humans with balanced perspectives would enjoy, yet in practice, a lot of people seem to be enjoying it. Things like this exist, that is possible. But I think it's pretty rare. I think people, when they hear stuff like that, they go like, yeah, like the mainstream, like the Avengers movies or something. It's like, I feel like those are basically fine, and you might just argue that they might be a touch boring sometimes, or the script is a little dry in places. but it's not really fair to say those are bad, in my opinion. They, I could see someone, maybe Mr. Food, arguing that they're creatively shallow in a way that is the meaningful way to evaluate a piece of art. Sure. Even then, I feel like there's some interesting approaches taken in those movies at times. Some, uh, go figure. But it's just an example. I think that people are a little over afraid, like sharks at the beach, that there are going to be like boogeymen or problems with taking other people's recommendations when that's possible. But I mean, you can check if it's likely when you take a recommendation. Do you know the person literally at all? And thus, do you have a reason to trust that they're not like hopelessly biased? If they are, you'll know they'll be insufferable in day to day life. So it's not like that is somehow limited to game recommendations. Likewise, there's also no such thing as a person who is good at recommending games, but is just like atrocious at, I don't know, like communicating more broadly. That they're kind of the same skill, I would say. You need to be able to explain yourself, both cases. So I don't think it's that hard to figure that out. Sometimes I have this attitude like, Mr. Fruit, I hate to be overly critical to your friends, but the people who've rejected this recommendation from you, it's like, why do you like me if you have so little faith that I would be able to look past this other thing? And of course, the answer is often that that's not what's going on. It's that they want a reason to put aside the recommendation. This is a key thing about recommending games to other people, not just taking recommendations. A lot of people just want an excuse to oversimplify something out of their life. They simply don't want more things on their list, basically. I feel there are two basic solutions. You could encourage them to make a list. I personally feel like pretty much everybody ought to do this when they have like a hobby they enjoy. Have a big list of the things you'd want to try and then just leave them there. When you get a recommendation, you can then not try it or reject it. You can instead just put it on a list. A nice helpful way to do this if you're just starting out or if you're getting recommendations from friends, let's say anime, just make a little column in the notepad document for each person. Here's John's recommendations, and here's Kelly's recommendations, and here's Ash's recommendations, and then write the shows below them. A blurb if they have them. Obviously, rules of good recommendations still apply. Is there a reason they're recommending this? What do you think is uniquely interesting about this show? Why did you recommend this to me? If they say something like, well, I just really like blank, you could say, what do you really like about blank? Maybe they'll be able to find like the inherently good thing, the inherently interesting thing about what they currently see as just they like that thing. They'll say, you should watch Symphogear. It's like a magical girl show, but they like sing while they fight, and you can hear the voice actors inflecting as they like get exhausted or winded while beating the crap out of things with their magical girl abilities, but they're singing while they're doing it. But they're like live singing, sort of. It doesn't just play a song. The voice actress like sings while delivering their performance in the studio during the scene. And you might say, that's really weird. Why? Why? And I actually don't know, having brought up this example. I'm not sure why they chose to do that. But it's neat. It adds a certain type of momentum to the show and the fight scenes in the show. It's like a very weird, like anti-musical theater as well. Like I think that is fascinating. I'm someone who has worked on a good amount of musical theater in my life, in high school and college, mostly tech, though I was in a few of them, not as a major character. I'm not a skilled actor or singer. But I have a very low opinion of musical theater. I am endlessly fascinated by like what musical theater is. When you make something musical theater, what are you doing? Like what is this form? It's extremely weird, and I think way more narrow than people give it credit for, and bad but really interesting, but and not bad at everything. It can be very good at a few things, but just really narrow. I guess that's what I mean by bad. Like really narrow, though. It would be like if books were only good for telling 1% of the types of stories that books are good at telling. That I would kind of just feel like books were just bad if that was true, but they're not. That 1% is still really cool. I don't know that, and it's fine if you like musicals, but I don't. But I think they're very interesting, and it's kind of like a weird reversed version of musicals in a show. Anyway, and I would explain that to you. Maybe your friend could do that. They could say something like, I like musical theater, and this is like action-y anime musical theater. And you would go, that sounds really weird. Like maybe, okay, and you can put that on the list at least. You could just write like anime musical theater question mark seems biased. You could write something like that. And maybe you'll eventually enjoy it. And if you hear another perspective point, well, you can begin to triangulate. Very nice. So, yeah, I think that them making a list would be ideal. I have a friend who I'm thinking of here, so from my personal life, if you know who you are, you know who you are. You won't. So option number 2 is I make a list for you, and you can have it if you want, but if you won't manage it, then I will, because it's so easy that it usually just isn't a big deal. I'll just make a list of things I want to recommend to people, and then go, what do you want? Let's do anime again. What are you watching currently? And they'll say, like Dandadan season 2 or something, and I'll say, hey, yeah, that's been cool. The new opening is a whole situation. Have you watched Hunter x Hunter 2011? Maybe you would like something that is taking the same like weirdo world building aesthetic, but is more straight faced, and has a certain type of action that you might enjoy. This would be kind of a step away. It's not that much like Dandadan. Maybe you would enjoy that. It is this epic adventure that kind of everything follows from its previous step. And then maybe, timed correctly, I probably wouldn't recommend it when they're watching Dandadan. I bet I could come up with something better. Maybe you could give a better recommendation, sure. But I am here not critiquing Mr. Food for recommending this to their fellows. Nay, I am commiserating. I understand. To some extent, it's like, okay, well, I can just explain to you that I have done a bunch of work to like position the recommendation in a way that's useful to you, and then wouldn't you be willing to just take it? Surely it's better than like whatever marketing you last saw. So I do think it's fair that a lot of people begrudge other people's recommendations. It's like, it would basically be a good recommendation, and then there are just some pitfalls. But in some ways, it's like, if you think so little of the person that you think just because they like it, they're totally blindsided by the fact that they enjoy it, and they're not thinking about you at all. Like, are you friends? Like, I think I've earned being thought better of. I would be willing to say. And if I haven't, then fine. Don't take the recommendation. You got one for me? I think it is mean that people think it's silly that you're suggesting this, and that's like a bad suggestion, Mr. Food. I'm sorry. That makes me genuinely a little sad. I think it's fine. It makes total sense. And when you break down like that the Kerbal Space Program would be a universal experience, I would say it seems pretty easy to check. I mean, do you need rocketeering knowledge to begin playing the game? No? Sounds like anyone can experience the joy of discovery. Whether people will experience that, I think, is probably ultimately a topic for another time, but it's kind of related. And I've tried to argue it a little bit as we've went through. Like, there are universal things about the human experience. If people start breaking down, like, why do you like this? Why do you like that? There are things every human does like. Like, the thing people are getting out of their first-person shooter or their RPG or whatever, not that those genre tags are helpful in any way, but whatever, just like think of any games. The things people are getting out of playing those things are things all human beings enjoy. Like, there's not like some people who are weird chimeras and they do not share those things. Okay, like, for the most part, fine. I'm sure you could find examples, but like most of the things that people are getting out of these things, most people think they don't want to get it that way, or they have a misconception about it. But I'm brought, as always, to the example of coffee. The black coffee that people who say they don't like coffee don't like, most of the people who would say they do like coffee indeed agree that that coffee is bad. Like, and in fact, there is not disagreement about a single cup of coffee sitting on the table that this party argues is just objectively disgusting and everybody hates, and this party argues is really good. They're mostly arguing about two different cups of coffee. And the one party is saying, this is gross. Why do you like this? And the other party is saying, we don't. We like this. Why don't you like this? And they say, I might, but I don't like this. That's what I'm talking about. That's what coffee is. And it's like, okay, but obviously it's just two different things. This is not complicated. This, like, almost all discussions, this is the confusion. People who like making builds. I've constantly had this trouble where people will say, like, oh, but I don't want to spend the time like puzzling it out or whatever. It's like, well, but it's not like you should be trying to figure out what is appealing about it to the people who like it, not your negative, almost certainly wrong, because lots of people are enjoying this predisposition about what you would think this would need. Like, if people would reject Kerbal Space Program and say, oh yeah, because I don't want to like have to puzzle out how to make any progress in the game at all. It's like, okay, but if you were to enjoy the game, you would enjoy that experience. So you need to imagine that it is enjoyable to do that thing, that it would be fun to achieve that thing. You can't just say, I don't want to do the bad part, so it's bad. It's like, but what about the good part? Like, you need to weigh the two things against each other. That is always very weird to me. And if you look closely, you'll find that most discussion where people disagree about something, the person who thinks it's bad is simply disregarding all of the good things, and the person who's saying it's good is downplaying the bad things a lot of the time. But I feel like it's usually pretty easy to just say what they are too, and then people can puzzle it out. There's no recommendation I will take quicker than, here are good and bad things about the game. I think the good things are worth it. Here is why I think the good things are worth it, and why you couldn't just play something else instead. Here's what you do while you're playing it. Which, so far, Dungeon 100, how about Kerbal Space Program? You added a few notes for folks to take home if they decide to take this recommendation. Some notes for those who actually want to try the game. Number 1, buy Kerbal Space Program 1, not Kerbal Space Program 2. Kerbal Space Program 1 is cheaper, has more features, less bugs, and you can get everything out of it that you could get out of a sequel. As it stands now, the sequel is a pretty but unfinished and abandoned piece of software that is sold at full price. The story of Kerbal Space Program 2 is a tragedy in 3 acts that is outside the scope of this way too long reply. Very well. Number 2, there are tutorials in the game that can help you learn, as well as the KSpedia, that's fun, Kerbal Space Program Wikipedia, in the game. But these are resources you could easily miss. There's also a ton of great content on YouTube if you get stuck. Yeah, this type of game is usually quite foolproof for that kind of thing in the 21st century. You can enjoy playing it yourself, understanding that looking stuff up is probably going to be less of a good experience on its own, but assured that you will easily be able to get through anything you get stuck on because there's lots of resources online. This is also a good reason to choose now to start trying something like a Souls-like game, if you've been shy in the past. As long as the game has some build options, it's almost impossible that designers have balanced it in a way where you can't trivialize it somewhat, so you can probably just safely roll into the game and know that if you really cannot get past the boss, you would be able to look up something that would trivialize it, and in the absolute worst case, you could probably mod through it. Speaking of which, number 3, the 2 DLCs are great, but optional for new players, and number 4, this game has some of the best mod support in the industry, as well as a mod manager called CKAN, that is stupidly stable and even more easy to use. If you want additional helpful features or updates to the admittedly dated graphics, there are mods to suit your needs out there. Cool, nice to know. Again, while I want to evaluate it separately from the core game, very relevant for a game like this that is kind of a simulation engine. And 5, there are 3 modes to the game: Sandbox, Science, and Career. I highly recommend Science mode for new players for a complex set of reasons I once again won't explain for time reasons. That's a little more unfortunate. I would love to know that, but I understand it was a very long reply. And you didn't have any way to know that that was the last thing submitted. We got 2 very in-depth, very good, I think, very well structured, very capable recommendations, very takeable recommendations. However, no more. That's it. Hopefully this was a good enough opportunity to discuss some recommendation quibbles that I have, and in a useful way rather than just complaining. And again, as always, that if you disagree, you now, what about what I think you disagree with. You don't have to accept the thing I'm saying. You can do whatever you want. But hopefully if you disagree, it's now because I've said something and you thought, well, I don't agree about that because of this reason. Great. If that keeps happening, then we will advance our human understanding of what is a good way to recommend things. And that's all I want. If I find out right after recording this parlay that I realized something in a flash of inspiration, and lo and behold, I am deeply, deeply wrong, at least from my perspective, about people taking more recommendations or recommendations being good in this way, I would delightedly record a follow-up to this if that happened. I would like nothing more than for the thing I currently think to be upended by something that makes more sense to think. I hate my current opinions because they're boring. I want something to move forward. So if that comes from other people thinking, that's not that good of a point, this would be a better point. Oh my goodness, great. Please tell me also if you have objections to this. That sounds cool. Yeah, I mean, I guess a big thing from me as a send off is that I, in the past, have been quite shy about taking recommendations. And I've made an effort to stop being that way this calendar year. That was one of my goals at the beginning of this year, which has went very well. I have a big list of the backlog of games that I've played, which a lot of you have probably seen. It's posted in the Toolshed channel, Toolshed of Links, which is near the top of our Discord server. If you want access to that, you can see the stuff I've been playing and the stuff I am planning to play, basically, using my arcane, it's actually pretty simple, but it is maybe a little weird at first, system for categorizing the things I want to play. My reason for wanting to play them, which is most of the spreadsheet, how confident I am I'm going to get what I want to get out of them, not how likely I think it is that they will be good, because that doesn't matter, but how likely it is that I think I will see what I wanted to see. And then, you know, when I added them to the sheet, what's happened with them if I've tried to play them or acquire them or something, etc. And I didn't attempt a lot of things on that sheet. In particular, I kind of shied away from a lot of them because I think I was using the idea that other people settle really easily as a fear toward a lot of games. And I think that's reasonable in Warren's brief discussion. I think a lot of people are willing, they want the thing that the game promises badly enough that they will just accept a lot of bad quality of life along the way. And there isn't really a reason to do that once you have all these excellent recommendations. Once you have some perspective, I believe it's not particularly sensible to tolerate so much like bad stuff in the game's design. You could have a game that was just really good. And so I often feel that when a game is like full of jank and negative experiences, but it's popular and people say they like it, to me, I smell that people are very, very enamored with the concept, but just like are settling for the negative features. And the mistake there, though, is that doesn't mean that I won't be able to overcome those negative things. You know, in many cases, yeah, but a more adaptable or flexible perspective, I could just move by many of the things that would be frustrating for other players. In Elden Ring, I found that much of the difficulty or like roadblocks or like difficulty spikes people have experienced, I felt like I was open-minded enough that I was able to just kind of worm through much of the time, and I've ended up having a pretty good experience, even with, I would agree with the late game combo enemy attack difficulty spike. I still kind of feel like I've wrangled that in to an extent, and while I still criticize that part of the game, and even if you get around it, I mean, it still limits how you are going to play if you have to abandon the playstyle you were enjoying because now the enemies have kind of, you know, escalated to bullshit to delete that playstyle. You can still come up with one that I would enjoy that will kill them. So I think that's fine. And that's been a pretty interesting experience. In Clair Obscur, I believe, Mr. Food, I asked you an interesting question. Clair Obscur is a turn-based combat game that has that mechanic where when an attack comes in, you're meant to hit the button at the right time to, like, mitigate damage from the attack. Like, kind of parrying, but in a turn-based combat game. I understand why some reasons why other people enjoy that, but I don't like it. I really don't like it. I think it kind of sort of defeats the point. Like, why? Like, it's frustrating. I want turn-based combat. Turn-based combat is not inherently worse or boring such that it needs to have these innovations added to it. They're not necessarily innovations. Now, putting that aside, I'm very interested to see how it does it. I think there are a lot of interesting twists on turn-based combat that can be cool. They're not just like compensating for its perceived boredom. They can be good in their own way. It's just something else. You know, my solution would be I would rather just not call them turn-based combat games, because they're kind of not turn-based. You know, you do need to play them as a live-action game. They just have an unusual pace compared to other live-action games. It's not truly a turn-based experience. It's mostly about timing the stuff, and then it is also with the frame of turn-based combat, in many cases. I don't know about Clear Obscure, I haven't tried it yet, but I asked you, Mr. Fruit, can you play this game without doing any of the parry inputs? And you said, I think yes. You said to me, probably will have enough comfort with the build system that you will be able to out-engineer that part of the game. And indeed, where is the fear exactly? I mean, I might not absolutely love the system, but I've got Clair Obscur on Game Pass right now. Like, I don't have to buy it or pay for it, so why not play a few hours, dislike the parrying that I don't feel I can get around, and then just stop playing? Like, what exactly is the problem, you know? I do think it's true that trying all these new things over and over again gets exhausting. But I think more to the point, I was lacking some confidence, weirdly enough. It doesn't really make sense for me to, with all these resources and experience I have. But, you know, I'm not some arrogant asshole as much as you probably think I am. But I thought maybe it would, you know, be challenging in a negative way. Just frustrating, basically. That I would not enjoy having to time the attacks. It is a case also where I admit one of those things that I think people really want the experience, but it's kind of just frustrating, and I don't really agree that this is actually that fun, is the thing where people want, often in some Souls-likes, or it can be in these games where you time your button presses to when the enemy's attack comes in, you can't really intuit and play as you go. You have to just memorize the attack in some of these games. And people say they like that, and those things are popular, and I believe they are literally all just wrong, and that is kind of objectively not that fun. But people just really want to feel like they're better for having done it, and so that's kind of propped up. But I believe it's just bad. Again, I'm open to changing my mind about that, but having played a good amount of games like that, I don't know. Like, I think it's a lot more fun to be able to think about how you're attempting the thing, instead of the game kind of forcing that to be wrong. And instead you just have to figure out the arcane timing necessary. Like, I feel like that is kind of just bad, but a lot of people like that, and I think there's something going on there, that's all. So anyway, an interesting example of my cynicism toward recommendations. I say that, hopefully not to espouse anger for no reason, but just as an example of, like, I hear you, people who are skeptical of the recommendations. In many cases, you're actually being polite when you say what sounds pretty mean. Just because you like something doesn't mean I will. You're stupid for thinking this is a good suggestion. You're actually sugarcoating it. And what you really mean a lot of the time, I know most of you, what you really mean is, I believe that thing is objectively unfun. Your fun is wrong. Like, it can be. It can be that their fun is wrong, but I really feel like I, and some of you, have overestimated that. Like, that's not true that often, I don't think. I think people actually have pretty good standards for these things overall, and it's pretty rare for something to become very entrenched in our culture, but it's just like, there is absolutely no benefit, it's terrible, you would never want to do this, at least in gaming. I can actually think of a huge amount of things that... Okay, let's end the parlay there. Thanks for your responses. Looking forward to the next one. Crew Parley, folks, is something that's open to a very large number of people who support me financially for the work that I do for you. So if you have a $5 like Twitch Prime, or it could be normal paid Twitch sub, or the $5 tier in my Patreon, or the $5 tier through YouTube memberships on the Zanny Pants channel, those all let you respond to this. So a lot of you listening can respond to these for free every month. They're just up. I just put one up at the beginning of every month, and then people can respond. So I'd love to have you. It's okay if we have these intimate ones with one or two bigger responses, but it would be cool to have one with a lot. So check it out if you want. The one for July is prompting prompts. Basically, I asked all of you what you think makes a good prompt for this service. And it can also include things like, do you like that I'm including my own agenda a lot? Or do you want me to really heavily emerge what I say based on the prompts? How much do you want it to be a blend of the responses and my thing versus how much do you want just the responses and then it emerges from that? Could be stuff like that. You can shape how this is going a lot because this is still a relatively new thing. And I feel like I'm mostly not very good at writing prompts for these. That's why the normal version of Parley has you write the prompt. Anyway, we'd love to have you. Link in the description. See you in the next one.